All right, while Chris gets set up, I just wanted to come up here and kind of thank Chris for everything he's done for our user group and for the community. Who here has met with Chris and probably already talked to him about their Power BI deployment? I'm sure probably like half this room. I know that guy for sure. So his presentation is going to be on the trail map for enterprise deployment of Power BI. I had to memorize that one. But yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions for Chris's presentation, so we're going to reserve enough time for that. I may also have some surprises in my pocket if you do ask a question, so yeah.
Thanks, Craig. All right. How many of you guys are deployed in Power BI right now across your company? Okay, like 25%. How many are working towards getting that? You know, you're driving towards trying to deploy it. Another roughly 25%. I'm not sure what the other 50% are here for, but so we at Columbia, I work at Columbia Sportswear. I'm sure you guys all know who that is. We're right nearby here, and we did a rapid deployment of Power BI. We years ago when I joined Columbia, we were in a very traditional state. We had some traditional BI platforms, and there was a huge line of people waiting for reports. And there was a prioritization quarterly, just frequently enough, to get your minor modifications put into reports. And we pivoted from that into a self-service model. And since then, have really kind of lit a fire across the business on people analyzing their data, publishing their content, and getting it out to their stakeholders. So I want to go through some of what that was like, and I'd love to hear questions about what you're curious about the process or the experience. And I'm going to share a bunch of tips and tools that came up along the way. So this is our monthly active user snapshot. This is how our Power BI grew over past a year. It's a pretty big spike. We went from having just a small fledgling cluster of pro users. Our PMO had some requirement to use Power BI because they were using Project Online. And we were running Tableau at the same time. We made a big pivot to a Microsoft ERP, and our whole cloud strategy instantly took flight towards Azure. And I have to say, I've never seen such a rapid shift in a big team. I mean, we really adopted the cloud aggressively. And I was skeptical about Power BI because I've lived through Microsoft's really painful decade of not very good PI tools and fits and starts. But this has been an incredibly impressive platform in terms of scalability, ease of administration, self-service. So we've got about 1,200 distinct users right now, people who have come in to our Power BI platform. So what is it like to roll Power BI out across a company? So, there's lessons we've learned, and there's mistakes that we are still making today. There's tech debt, and there's history that we're shaking off and moving forward with. I want to talk to you about what it was like and hopefully help you with your deployments that you have coming. I was talking last night with my wife about this presentation, and I said, it's called a trail map for deployment. And she said, does it have a trail map in it? And she was challenging me to actually make a trail map where I guide you on the trail, and I didn't have time to do that. But this is the trail map. So first, we're going to start like any good hike. We're going to pack or get prepared for the trail. And then we're going to hit the trailhead and start the journey. I'll describe, what that is like. We'll talk about security and being ready for the elements. Data is really critical. We all know that. I'm going to speak to that a bit more. And I'll identify some pitfalls and risks. It's going to be really from our perspective doing it at Columbia, but I think you'll be able to relate to a lot of them. And then looking forward, there's some things I'm excited about in Power BI. So all of these photos are from my time outdoors, most of the photos. This was a hike that a couple buddies of mine did on the John Muir Trail a couple years ago. And if you've ever been with your grandmother and she sits down and goes through photo albums and describes them, I'm hoping that's the way you feel as I go through this. So I have an unhealthy obsession with checklists. I'm a private pilot for fun on the side, and I think that's where it started a while ago. And I have checklists for everything. My moment when I was sure I fell in love with my wife was when she transitioned from saying, "You have a checklist for that?" to, "Oh, it's checklist time." So whenever we go on trips, I pull them out. I'm going to try and formulate this presentation in checklist format as much as I can, so that with each one of these phases, you can kind of have a list of things to look at as you're going through your own deployment. I was that kid on outdoor trips when we were younger who had the utility belt with all the little tools. It was really cool. Thank you. So things you need to pack: people, process, technology, and data, of course. Roles are really critical. I'm going to talk about roles in a little more depth, but it is not as simple as just lighting up Power BI and letting it spread. You really have to have all the roles clarified and have intention in how you're engaging with all those people who are going to be using this platform, not only in that centralized world of IT, but also in that decentralized world. Before you go in, you're going to be asking for budget. You're going to be asking for approval. You need to know how many users you're going to anticipate. If you're in a situation where you can write blank checks, great, but most of us have to estimate what our costs are and stick to that. So there's a number of things you can do for estimating your users. You probably have existing BI tools already. You can be digging into that data and really seeing how many people are using it now and use those to estimate what your Power BI deployment cost is going to be. You need to be aware of the political forces at play. Some, depending on your company structure, if you're all on the same page, great, but sometimes there's dueling executives. You need to be aware about what their motives are, so you can navigate that as you're trying to move the deployment forward. From a process standpoint, I'll talk more about budget, licensing, and approval and what that's like. Security and governance, of course. If you don't already have security processes and governance processes, you're not going to make things better by really amplifying your self-service. I was talking with a customer earlier today. We talked about the idea of throwing gasoline in a fire. You can get a lot of warmth from gasoline in a fire, but you just need to be aware that some things you do before launching your Power BI can go a long way. Some of that is simply asking the question, how do you know what truth is? How do you deliver trust now? Because the technology might help you with that, but there's a tremendous amount of human processes that satellite around a deployment that you need to be ready for. Self-service and centralized service or hybrid. I'll talk a little bit more about that in depth, but there's a big fork in the road when you start to do a Power BI deployment. And you're choosing between how heavily you're weighing self-service as the delivery versus doing it all within IT or a mix. So technology, the architecture of your companies really are a dependency for BI. You can't take an unhealthy enterprise architecture and do healthy BI out of it. If you don't have unity in your systems, if you don't have clarity on where data is stored and how the network topology is designed, it's going to be really difficult to bolt BI onto that and have it be successful. So it's really important that you're essentially attaching to a healthy overall technology strategy and data strategy that goes beyond just the data warehouse and data lake and BI. We have an enterprise architecture team that's helped us navigate that and be very forward-looking. At Columbia, we had some conversations years ago that there's a huge array of options to choose from when you're deploying an analytic platform and ecosystem. You can do AWS, you can do Google, you can do Microsoft. We're here at a mostly Microsoft conference, but the reality is you guys have multiple vendors. And we had a discussion about 2 years ago that amounted to, look, we can analyze the whole world and it'll take a long time and it'll be difficult, or we can pick a cloud focus and it'll speed things up. And our CIO committed and really helped us out with narrowing those decisions. And we went with Azure, and we were pretty heavily Microsoft focused already in SAP, but it really accelerated the process. We didn't linger in analysis paralysis as much because we knew we were going forward with a data platform in Azure. So being aware of what your cloud strategy is has a huge impact. If you are sticking on-prem, your Power BI deployment is going to be a lot different than a company that's going to be coupling Power BI with Azure. You're going to be much more dependent on the gateways that exist and the latency that comes into that, the extra complexity of moving data back and forth from on-prem to the cloud. Compatibility with your analytics sources. So if you're running all SQL Server and Oracle, you're probably going to be pretty okay with the Power BI deployment. But it's really important that you dig into that in advance to know what you're signing up for. And I'm happy to talk more deeply with anyone who has questions about that. We had hopes about certain types of data connections that really we're still kind of waiting to have them improve. Databricks is one example. We're using Databricks for a lot of our compute on Data Lake. And our hope was that, great, this is going to be not only an ETL engine, but it's also going to be an information delivery engine, like a query engine. And yet, Microsoft doesn't really fully support it. It's a pretty new Azure service. It requires the gateway. And they're working through that, but it's not there yet. So you need to not just assume it's going to work because of the marketing. You need to dig into it. And I really recommend that as you're studying what that world is going to be like when you deploy it, you focus a lot on the gateways. We've had a lot of pain with the gateway connectivity, and that's especially true if you've got a strong data gravity on-prem. So if you've got SAP, we've had a lot of struggles with SAP connectivity, and boy does it echo from the days when we deployed Tableau and had a lot of SAP connectivity challenges. So depending on how much of your data is in these different systems, dig in deep on that compatibility. From the data standpoint, geography it has a really big impact as well. I don't know if you guys know, but in your company, if you have an office tenant, your region is selected based upon the first person who logs in, who's presented a drop-down that says, well, here's the kind of the recommended region, and this is what you're picking. They don't know what they're doing. You're burning yourself into that region indefinitely. So if you're getting started, it's really important to think about geography, think about where your headquarters is. If you have a subsidiary, a remote subsidiary, and that's the person who's first logging in, initiating Power BI, that could be a significant problem. Think about as well where that data gravity is going to be. You want to have your Power BI tenant close to your users, where the latency is going to be low. And you're most likely going to have to bind part of your Azure region and the resources you put into it to that Power BI tenant. Analysis services is a good example. You don't really want an analysis services resource on one side of the country and your Power BI on the other. You want them to be really quick, and the user experience should be very, very snappy. Geography also comes in from the standpoint of where your users are distributed. So if your headquarters is where everyone is and your Power BI tenant is in that region, great. But if you have significant offices in other areas, you need to be potentially thinking about a multi-geo scenario. And you need to be aware of what those users are going to experience. And there's some tools that can help you do that. And lastly, as you're just starting to get going in this, really ask yourself, how healthy is our data warehouse? I'll talk a little more in depth on that, but it's a good point to really just think about whether you need to do some foundational improvements before launching this effort. So roles. On the right in the gray box, there's a great document that Microsoft has, and actually there's a corresponding webinar called the Power BI Adoption Framework. It's worth checking out. These are the roles that they mentioned, and it's very focused on the users who are coming into Power BI. It's through that lens. So you have your consumer, your explorer, your data analyst. There are a lot of roles missing from that. Depending on the size of your company, either people are going to be wearing a lot of hats, or you may have different people around the company all collectively chipping in to your deployment. So trainers, for example, we've partnered with CSG. They've done a lot of our training, which has been worked out really well. You have workspace admins. That's a business role typically, where different functions are taking ownership over a workspace you're putting Power BI content into. Those people play a significant role from the standpoint of security, governance, and also management. Essentially, they are your delegates out from IT into the business for managing content. The gateway admins, if you are heavy on-prem, this gateway admin role really is crucial. There's a lot of care that needs to go into these gateway upgrades because at least from our perspective, we've had bugs and unreliability issues. Hopefully they've gotten better, but that's your pipeline to all your on-prem data. So it's an important role. The Power BI admin, the people who really control the tenant need to know what they're doing. In every company that has Office 365, someone holds the keys to that entire tenant. They delegate a role called Power BI admin. So it's really important to, if you're deploying, know who that person is going to be and start buying 6-packs for your Office 365 admins. They're going to be really key for getting things set up. Cloud admins as well. If you are deploying in Azure or AWS, there's a lot of interdependency between the data sources that you're going to be connecting to and your whole Power BI deployment. So your data lake, your data warehouse, if they're in the cloud, there's a lot of work you need to do to properly configure resources that go into Azure, if it's Azure you're using. Data engineers and DBAs is of course, as well. So that balance between the centralized and the decentralized is hopefully a deliberate choice that you're making. You can be really heavily self-service focused. You can push out the responsibility of the design of models, of the building of reports, of the connecting of data to your business users. That's one option. The other option is you can do kind of like what we were doing years ago, where everything is centrally developed. And if you're a small enough company and you can pull that off, great. It's a challenging thing to scale because every little change typically requires someone doing it in that central team. More often than not, I think this middle ground tends to exist where you're deploying centralized sources and then people are extending those or adding their local content to that as well. So budgeting, license, and approval. Understanding your Microsoft licensing, you need to do that when you're starting this process of deployment. So if you have an E3, an enterprise license, an E5, it comes with different things, and that really impacts the cost you're going to have. Some people I've talked to are surprised, oh, we already have Power BI Pro for all of our employees. And that makes things a lot easier. But you need to understand what you currently own and what you're paying for. Related services, so Flow, Power Apps, Visio, these are not critical pieces for the deployment, but they're satellites of Power BI. So Flow is used for advanced alerting if you want to manage alerting of Power BI based on metrics, for example. Power Apps, there's a whole licensing scheme for that. If you're going to do read-write, kind of bidirectional BI where you're writing back data and then it flows into the dashboards, a whole separate licensing. It's not free. Visio, there's a custom visual for Visio where you can glue together data sets to objects. You can't do that unless you buy Visio Pro or Visio Plan 2. So these are little bits that all tend to add up, and you should be aware of the cost that you need to put into those. Of course, if you have a budget where it's all centrally managed, that makes things easier. That's the way we're working at Columbia. But if you're going to be funding that through business regions, you're going to have to do rebilling, and you're going to need to be ready for that in terms of a usage tracking and budget management perspective. So getting approval. This is a soft side of launching your deployment, and I've done this a number of times. I've done BI platform selections. I've talked executives into purchases based on justification, and I've seen different ways that they work. A lot of it's based on trust. but a huge amount of it is based on value. If you can sit down with a spreadsheet and build out a model of what your costs are going to be, what money you're going to save, and the value you're going to deliver with it, I don't know too many executives who won't appreciate that. And it's really important to assess that as broadly as possible, because you don't just add up the licensing costs of your business objects, for example. You add up the OS, the backups, the backup servers, all the labor costs that goes into maintaining those, the databases. There's a tremendous amount of cost in these traditional platforms that dissipates when you're using a cloud solution. You're lightening your load in a lot of ways, and it's important to get those out into your model as you're justifying the costs. It doesn't hurt to be the drug pusher. Giving your approvers a demo dashboard that is tangible can go a long way. So there's a calculator out there, and if you guys have seen it, I'm not going to go into detail about how it works. I just want to say I used this calculator early on when we were deploying, and I went back into it recently, and I was amazed at how accurate it is. Like, it really, they've put a lot of effort into this calculator, and I would recommend you trust it. So if you're trying to decide how much premium you need in your deployment, it's trustable. There's down the bottom right, there's a blog post that I've included in here too. A fellow goes into the details about how to use this. He also built a Power BI dashboard that lets you project out a couple years beyond what the calculator does. It's pretty useful. Another useful tool is there's a white paper that Chris Webb and another woman, Melissa Coates, published last year. It was reviewed by the whole Power BI product team. And it has a lot of depth. They've been keeping it up to date as well. It's a great dig into the aspects of deploying Power BI. It came a little bit late when we were deploying, but I read it and was impressed by how much detail they have in it. So there's a link in the document to that. So you've gotten approval. You now have the budget to go forward with Power BI Pro, likely Power BI Premium if the scale justifies it. It's now time to start taking those first steps. So you're going to need to do a number of things. Again, people, process, technology, and data. As the team that's deploying it, it's super important that you know it inside and out. And I think getting that head start on deeply learning the product, learning DAX, learning the administration, the sharing capabilities, you would not believe how many questions we've gotten over the past year and a half on sharing. Just sharing content with Power BI is very confusing to a lot of users. The more broadly you go, the more creative they get in trying to share content. So learning it all really deeply early saves you a lot of time. And I think partnering with the pilot group makes a big difference, especially if you have someone you already have a great relationship with, whether it's a department or it's a portion of IT that's going to go early. Lets you work out those kinks before you start rolling it out more broadly. Planning your training as well. So it's one thing to train your core team, but when you start putting Power BI Desktop in the hands of people who are masters at Excel, you're going to melt their brains. They don't know about dimensional modeling. They don't know about data transformation. They are used to VLOOKUP. And it's critical that if you are going to be delegating that self-service to them, that you bring them along with empathy and you either help them by building the models for them so that work is a lot easier, which is ideal, or you really give them the resources to be able to learn these fairly complex tools as quickly as possible. I'll talk a little bit about building an internal support website. We have one that's been helpful. Your workspace strategy is also a big decision point. So if you guys are using either the Power BI Free or Pro, you have your My Workspace, and you can create workspaces. Once you deploy Premium, it really becomes your container for blasting content around the company. And you have a choice. Do you let people all create their own workspaces, or do you centrally control that and have a few people essentially put some back pressure and govern it? We're doing that, but I've talked with other people who just let it go. And they're very different approaches. A lot of it depends on how much you want to have chaos versus control. Automating your pro licensing. So we're not fully automated, but our users can basically just go to a link and with 2 clicks get a pro license. Not instantly, there's a little bit of process in the background, but making it easy for them to get pro licenses, it really improves their ability to keep up with their business demands. One thing that we still need to do, but is also important, is removing the pro licenses automatically. So I think Microsoft gives you, good flexibility to be able to move these licenses around. So one example, I just removed about 125 pro license users, so that's like $12,000 a year. It's important to manage those pro licenses because they're a viral element of this. They're not as expensive, as a Tableau or MicroStrategy, but that cost can start to build up. And if you look at it, each employee who's sitting there with the pro license tagged to them, who's not using it, that's just wasted money. So you need to be ready to control that as it starts to spread, and it does spread. Office hours is a concept that I picked up from Tableau years ago, and it was more of a sales technique. They knew that if they landed in a functional department and trained people and supported them and incubated it, they knew their software would sell better. And I think that the concept is still really valuable for deploying BI across an enterprise. So we have we've been offering office hours usually every 2 weeks. It's an hour. People can show up. They can bring their DAX questions, their Power BI questions, and it's like a doctor's visit. You just come in and get some help. And what's beautiful about that is, yes, having someone in your core team who knows the ins and outs there is great, but what it also incubates is community. So you have people who are sharing their dashboards they've built, their problems they've solved. And what's great is that the business users tend to be more intimate with the data. They have needs, and they can transfer that knowledge back and forth between them. So it's kind of the seed you're planting of community. I think if we had more time and energy, we'd have more office hours. But it's a great practice. I highly recommend it. From a technology standpoint, again, first steps, you need to set this stuff up. So, making those final choices on your regions. If your Power BI region's not right, you need to put a support ticket in and erase it and restart it, because it's going to be way harder to do after people start filling it with content. Your gateways, this is the point where you start setting them up. You've had the approval, now you get the software going. The idea of doing centralized models. So we did it. We were a little bit cart before horse. Just the nature of where we were. We were spending a lot of time with part of our data warehouse migration. But if you have a healthy data warehouse, and by healthy I mean it is globally perceived as having a high level of trust. It's a star schema. It's dimensional. It has a latency that meets business requirements. And there's enough horsepower there to be able to serve people across the company. It's really valuable to get your centralized models up at the same time you're deploying. What we had by putting our cart before our horse is people would go through training. They would learn how to assemble data with their Excel exports they get from Cognos or their other reporting tool, and they would feel the frustration of just wanting to connect to live data. I can't tell you how many times I've interpreted comments from people as being, I just want to be live connected to data. And if you have that centralized team, really step into that business perspective and give them those models so they don't have to do the ETL, the transformation, the assembling of that data. Boy, they can move a lot faster. So really think about which models you want to provision early on. Telemetry. So I'll talk in a little more depth on telemetry, but the point where you start deploying, you really want to start measuring what's going on, and there's a number of places to view that. And from the data standpoint, so that data warehouse, that's sitting there and is about to get hammered by Power BI, you need to be in sync with your DBAs, your data warehouse team, and understanding what the impact is going to be. A lot of legacy tools are pretty heavy on a data warehouse, things like business objects. Those are roll-up tools where they're throwing a lot of SQL down into the data warehouse. So for my perception, Power BI, likes to pull a lot more as import. So it can do a daily refresh and then it can carry all the load itself. But it's still really important that you think about the readiness of that data layer in terms of getting the data into Power BI. So the support site, this is what our support site looks like internally. It gives people the thing they want most, which is how do I get started? That's everyone's initial question. We have a whole section related to learning. The FAQs is a good place to drop all the frequent questions people have. We're playing with the idea as well of we have an intern this summer who's working on a cognitive bot, an Azure-based cognitive services bot that I'm hoping will be able to stitch together FAQs across different sites that we have in the company so there can be dialogue. So for example, you ask a question, it'll route you to that FAQ. So essentially, it's not just a website, but it can also be a repository of knowledge. And then sharing content, because there's, for whatever reason, so much confusion about sharing content. We have a whole section there for that. So the training is again, it's fuel for spreading that self-service. We have a number of classes that we offer. Most of these we've worked with CSG to build out. You guys can reap the benefits of us investing in that together as classes you can offer. So Power BI in an hour is pretty much an on-demand. What is Power BI? What is this thing? And it just orients people. They can click on that link and then just basically enroll in that, and they pull up and we do an hour of just brief overview. What is Power BI? What can it do? What are the tools? What are the services? That's just kind of the tease. And Power BI Fundamentals is the 2-day class that we do internally that gets people, the first day we give them the fruits of their labor, all the visualization. And the second day is they have to do the labor and understand how to transform and model and do DAX. And then there's an almost 1-day DAX and modeling. So you can't learn a language in a day, but it's basically a primer for how they go beyond just the fundamentals. We also have on-demand training. We bought LinkedIn Learning. I've yet to see anyone actually use it. People really love instructors, and they love sitting in a classroom and getting a free lunch. So that tends to be where people gravitate to. The dashboard in a day training. So that's out there on the internet. You can offer it to your users. They can download that zip file with the PDF and do a self-guided training. There's also folks like CSG who do those as well, but that's not intended to be a mass training resource. Although we actually did early on, we did a 60-day dashboard in a day in Columbia in one of our big rooms. It was a good way to get a lot of people started quickly. So generally, you start and you have this balance of heavy IT. You're basically leading new people into the process of learning this as you're deploying it. But as it starts to go, we saw this, that they weren't just coming to us for this training. They were starting to go to their peers in the business. We had people in the business building out documentation to help clarify things we didn't realize wasn't clear, which is a great problem to have. So training the trainer really that lets you scale, and this especially is true with geographies. So when you're thinking about different regions, whether it's Europe or Asia, those subsidiaries, if that's the type of company you have, can sometimes feel very disconnected from your headquarters. And I've had good luck interconnecting our regional offices with Microsoft partners, so they can get training localized in their language. That's worked out great. In terms of network, I'm jumping around here, but here's another tool, Azure Speed Test. So as you're taking those first steps, the different offices that you may have can use this tool. There's a link in the presentation that lets you basically assess how good is my location where I'm sitting in terms of connecting to Azure. And that's gonna guide you a little bit on which region you should be choosing for your deployment. The telemetry I mentioned, there is a huge repository of data, and it's all sitting in your Office 365 unified audit log. Those folks who you bought the six-pack for, the O365 admins, they're your ticket in to getting that data out. So you need to have a special permission to get that data out, and it's very rich. So if you want to measure what's going on in your company with Power BI, I highly recommend digging into this. The link I have in this presentation is a video from 2 years ago from one of the summits that walks through in detail how to set up that script. They give you a PowerShell script. It's a great resource, and you can report off it pretty easily through Power BI. My understanding is Microsoft's going to be improving this as well. So along with setting up that telemetry of seeing what's going on in your organization during the deployment is, if you are deploying premium, an app that lets you see into what's going on in that capacity. So in the same way you would monitor a server, a Tableau server, a Cognos server, a business object server, Microsoft builds out of the box this app that lets you see just how well your capacity is doing. So if you're investing in premium, which is really your primary way to share content across the company, this app is great, and it's been evolving pretty quickly. So you can see what are the slow data sets, who's eating up our capacity. And there's a lot of good documentation that walks through how premium works, and this is a great window into it. Another trick that we found is that, especially if you're heavy on on-prem data, the gateways have logs of their own as well too. So you can dip into those logs and pull out a lot of errors and see a lot of activity going on there. So we're using Splunk to ingest all those logs, and we can query in Splunk and build custom dashboards off of them to see what's going on. So I'm going to shift to security. So being ready for the elements is critical. We have we had a security incident a few years ago where a former employee was surreptitiously had admin rights on our tenant and was using it to his advantage. He wound up being arrested for it. And so security since that point became, obviously, a lot of companies, a really important topic. So it's, from a people standpoint, it goes a long way to have a great relationship with your InfoSec team. One thing that I've seen in working with security folks is they also want a lot of BI and data, and they are sitting on mounds of it. I mean, a lot of them have logs they just can't keep up with, and they are very appreciative of being able to better see into all that. So you can create this great relationship with them where you're helping them with their data strategy, and they're helping you with your security strategy. You also, from a people standpoint, those workspace admins in the business, since they are the ones who are igniting permissions to a lot of the content in Power BI when they're publishing apps and reports, training them is something, I'm not going to say we did a great job of it, but it is an important factor, especially with your sensitive data. If people are clicking share with entire organization, not knowing what that means, you can be basically sharing very sensitive data very broadly, very easily. From a process standpoint, your O365 and your Power BI tenant settings, you need to be deliberate about how you're choosing those, and having a control and audit strategy as well for that. For the technology element, Active Directory, there's a lot of technical planning that needs to go into that. You can't really deploy Power BI if you don't have folks already working through that process. And planning how groups work. Groups can be quite a rat's nest, and it's really important that as you're permissioning content, that your users understand which groups to use and that they're all set up correctly. Digging into the row-level security is also really critical. So there's a lot of great videos that walk through how to use Power BI row-level security, but there's also active Azure Analysis Services row-level security as well that you may be deploying. There's also the deployment path you're taking has a big impact too on the flexibility that your users are going to have. So if you are simply deploying Power BI data sets to people, they're going to have a certain amount of flexibility. If you're giving them self-service rights and permissions, and they can go directly against your data warehouse, it's a whole other approach. So being deliberate about how you're distributing that data really depends on the sensitivity of it and what your policies are around the company. One awesome thing that they showed at the recent summit was a demo where they do an export from Power BI and had flagged that data as being confidential. And even after downloading the Excel file, when you open it up, those controls are still attached to that data. So one thing that we never really had in the days of multiple vendors was a real umbrella protecting our data. So now with functionality that is baked into the cloud security portion of Microsoft's ecosystem and what's called data loss protection, one control can be protecting your email and also your Power BI. So whether that's restricting social security numbers from moving outside or some particular data patterns, it's important to know that exists so that you're not just kind of thinking you're in a BI silo doing it all yourself. So there's a lot of reusability of security policies and controls across the whole ecosystem. One thing that we did is with our Power BI Tenant, going through line by line and understanding each setting in depth. And I have a format here you can use for that. It's basically a description of each setting, the default that Microsoft gives it to you, and a place for you to deliberately put in what setting you're choosing with an explanation. And what I'd recommend if you're doing this is take this to your InfoSec team and sit down and review. This is what we're choosing. This is why we're choosing it. And just get harmony on that. And if you have other groups that really are critical for getting that consensus, this pattern, this tool can be helpful. So it's also a document that needs to live because I can't count how many times over the past year suddenly there was a new feature in there. And Microsoft doesn't exactly announce it very broadly, so it's important to periodically audit this and check it against what you have. And we discovered early on, one of our groups was deploying dashboards using publish to web, and it was, here are our strategic projects. Hey, everybody, here's a publish to web link, and on the bottom you can click Twitter or Facebook to share the whole dashboard, not realizing this is just spilling out into the internet. So we closed that. We locked down that setting pretty quickly once we learned what it was about. But don't make the same mistake. So data is hydration. When you're on the trail, your dashboards are only going to be as alive and as vibrant as the data that they depend upon. This was a shot I took in the Imperial Sand Dunes in California. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. You don't want your analysts and the people building dashboards to be starving for data. You need to have that reservoir that they are able to consume and interconnect data as they're publishing. Even to this day, we get feedback and struggles, from managers of teams who just say, "Could you please help us, with our productivity? We know it can be better than this manual process of refreshing." So knowing what it's like to be these analysts, it's wonderful to have a great tool like this, but it's even more wonderful to have it automatically refresh for you. And without the data, it doesn't happen. Your data warehouse is so critical in this. We've been talking about data lakes and this new technology replacing data warehouses. I don't believe it. I still think a data warehouse is still a central part of a strategy. And I love this quote that I saw years ago from TDWI. If you have more than one data warehouse, you have none. I still think it's true. The pattern that I think a lot of people are using, and we're using as well at Columbia, is very Azure-based. I won't go into each of these components, but it's pretty much a standard pattern that's been evolving in Microsoft BI lately. If you haven't done taking some of the tools from the Kimball Group, doing a bus matrix and being aware of their 4-step design process is valuable. And as you're thinking about your data warehouse design, there's a resource that was in the summit last week that I recommend you guys check out. It was a presentation by Peter Myers. It was an hour, but it was a very densely, very clearly communicated explanation about what Power BI wants to get out of the relationships in data. And if your data warehouse architects or modelers are not aware of this and they're presenting data out, not knowing that all these people self-serving have to then retransform the data, it's very inefficient. So this is a resource, not just to watch yourselves, but also to share with people on your team. Be aware of the fact that a data lake is not going to solve everything. Data lakes have been around a while. They are staging areas, I think at best. This is my personal opinion. You can't throw Power BI Desktop at a data lake and just run. You need some compute. And increasingly, we're seeing some cool patterns evolving. In particular, this blending of an enterprise data lake with a self-service data lake. That's what I'm calling it. It's basically a data lake under Power BI, and Microsoft is investing in this smooth flow of data between the two. So you have data engineers able to push data into the Power BI data lake, and business analysts able to push data into the data lake that then the data engineers can pick up. I think this is going to be really revolutionary over the next year, 2 years. And they announced something at the summit recently. You're going to be able to do direct query off of this data lake as well. So, not just doing direct query out to your Oracle database that's on the other side of the country, but doing direct query right against the data lake data, which is pretty cool. I think an aspiration you should have, because these analysts want all the data, is to give them a menu of the data. You go to a diner, you see a menu. We're using a data catalog to try and organize that, but increasingly, I believe we're going to see more of that capability in the platforms like Power BI. You see this new UI that's coming in with get data set or get data. This is, I believe, the tip of the iceberg of a data mesh that's coming. That's going to make it much more easier for people to combine data. So this was a beautiful mountain lake up in Trinity Alps that I was backpacking in years ago, and I was so excited to jump into this water. And you can see my dog there was swimming. And I jumped in with her, and I was blissing out. It was awesome until I saw this. So this thing swam by me, and it just ruined my day. It was snakes are my greatest fear. And so there's risks. There's things that pop up unexpectedly, and some dirty secrets of self-service BI. A lot of it happens in Excel. If you talk to our analysts, they are not blissing out over the fact that we gave them Power BI. They want more live connected data. And a lot of them, until you have that really healthy, the healthy dimensional models they can feed off of, are drinking out of puddles. So what's better than that, and I've done this with Tableau deployments I've done in the past, is to give people Tableau Desktop and bolt them onto a replicated copy of a transactional system. It's not ideal, but it gets them going. So really that best solution is to have a healthy data warehouse. And I think this problem is going to continue. You're never going to have enough data engineers. You're never going to have all your data in the data warehouse. So this was my son. We were hiking, and he's smiling. He's not being abused here. But he jumped over this log and snagged his jacket. So there's pitfalls that you're going to run into. I think low value is the biggest risk. You can amplify your value based on how you layer dependencies, like your data you provision to the folks, the training you put in. Each one of these things you add, if you do it correctly, magnifies the value you get out of a deployment. You have to solve them in parallel. Ideally, you've invested in that already in the past, and you're yielding the benefit. So looking forward, what's ahead? This was a friend of mine who was playing guitar at a camping outage. We had beautiful voice. It was an amazing night. I think that we're going to have a wave of self-service data prep coming. So data flows is arriving, and it has a lot more integration and scalability that people take coffee breaks because they're waiting for their Power BI desktop to refresh. Those days are going to fade away as more of this goes into the cloud and is more scalable on Data Lake. The centralized service and the self-service models, so they are going to become, I believe, more fluidly interconnected. Right now, if you say get data, Power BI data set, you are bound to that little bubble, and you can't be joining data across data sets. That data mesh of data sets having compatibility and interconnectedness is going to be getting better. And I'm super excited about that because I think it's going to, again, amplify that self-service capability. So tenant-wise, those security settings I was telling you about are just going to continue to get better. And I think it's going to take the burden off of BI. I think in the past we had to solve so many more security challenges because we were recreating security, and I think that's going to get easier and easier. I recently was talking with the product team, and I think I can share this. The data flows, we have certified data sets that just came out, you guys may be aware of. Certified data flows should be coming as well too. Interactive visualization, I think, I'm hopeful is gonna return to a point of simplicity. We have a lot of excitement. People first get a tool and they visualize it every way they can, but I think it's really important to teach people about the fundamentals of really healthy information visualization, and a lot of that comes down to simplicity. Analytic functions also, we're seeing really cool things arriving. If you have algorithms you want to share between data scientists and your self-service environment, the capability of that is really getting cool to the point where it's going to be interweaving with your data prep, and you'll be able to reuse functions across the company in the similar way you do custom functions in Power Query right now. So in summary, balancing those two realms of self-service and centralized service really makes for a more impactful deployment. And I think having that partnership with your user base is so fundamental. Having empathy for those people who are sitting and doing the work that you're serving is crucial. And I think in reverse, I really hope if you're on the business side, you understand that those IT people are there to help you. And I think partnership is really, really crucial. So I'm optimistic about where our industry is heading and where this platform is heading as well. So we went through preparing, we went through kind of the steps you go through and some tools for starting the journey, and touched a little bit on security and data, a little bit on pitfalls, and what's ahead. Any questions?
All right, questions.
I'll motivate you guys. We have employee store passes for whoever asks questions.
There you go.
Is it Felix? Yeah.
My only question is, can I get a pass? No. No, I went through a similar thing. I worked for Xerox, and we did not do it quite as well as you did, but echo everything that you said. Like, those are amazingly on the mark.
Yeah.
My question was around, we continue to still, even after doing all this, we can still continue to get reticence from like subject matter experts. Like, they didn't really access, and I don't want to learn something new because I already know how to do it. How did you kind of overcome? Did you use like change management tools, or like did you have those sorts of things to overcome with people, or people just?
We're not past that. I just built a dashboard that shows us metrics across all of our user base. How many times they're opening Excel? How many times they're opening Access, Power BI Desktop? I could keep going. And there is still a tremendous amount of Excel heavily, and I think that's going to never disappear. But what's great about doing BI on BI and getting that data in is you know who those people are. So it's one thing to say we want them to all get rid of their Access and move to Power BI, but it's way more effective to see who's the #1 Access user. Start with that person and work your way down. So sometimes you don't have that software, but sometimes it's sitting there and you don't realize you have it. We're using a tool called Snow for that, which is more of a licensing tool, but it helps.
Other questions?
Yeah, I think Felix had his hand up earlier. Yeah.
Felix? Making me run, Chris.
So I have two-part questions. So apart from the fact that you had a Microsoft strategy with your data, what other factor made you choose Microsoft Power BI instead of Tableau?
Yeah, well,
And then second question is how are you managing since Power BI files on desktop are really binary files? How are you really tracking changes on calculations that people do on DAX and things like that?
yeah, sure. So the question is, how did we choose Power BI over Tableau and other platforms, and how are we managing PBIX files? So I had a weird experience when I joined Columbia. We had no self-service. I spent a lot of time and energy talking our CFO into buying Tableau. We deployed Tableau, and then our strategy changed. We threw it away. It was brand new, and then went to Power BI. So we chose both. But Power BI, it's a lot less expensive. It incrementally, if you look at how it dovetails with if you're an O365 customer, the attractiveness has only been climbing. So, I'm friends with Cindy Howson, and she's been doing BI platform selection for years. We swap stories all the time, and she was at Gartner recently. So if you have a Gartner subscription, a lot of her artifacts she's built out. There's a critical capabilities matrix in there. You can pull down that scores all the BI platforms, and you can do weightings and sort of pick the best platform for you. I could talk to you for another hour about just platform selection, but cost was a big element. Compatibility with data sources was crucial for us as well. We're moving to Dynamics, and we knew Power BI was necessary. Hey, Paul.
Wait, Paul. Sorry.
Chris, I know from talking to you over the years that you've been chipping away at this self-service, doing self-service correctly for a few years now at Columbia. So what has the uptake been in using connected scenarios such as analyze in Excel or desktop against deployed data sets versus people owning the data and making yet another copy?
Yeah, we analyze Excel. I don't think we're using that too much, Ryan. Right? I mean, a little bit. Ryan's here. We're the co-Power BI admins, and analyze Excel lightly. I think Brian has rolled out most of our analyze in Excel with a hack that he has overjoyed people with getting a lot of data out. The fact that it's pro license dependent, is a little bit of a rain on that parade. But I understand Microsoft's opening that up, so it's not going to be pro dependent. I think people just are excited about dashboards, and I think I have a few people who just really want to learn Power BI, but they just don't have time for the training, and they just keep hitting snooze, and they keep using Excel. And I've found the solution of just rubbing it in, that it's way easier in Power BI, works pretty well. When you try and configure a pivot table in Excel, to get a view that takes just a few seconds in Power BI, and you show them that, it makes a big difference. But no, we haven't had very much analyze in Excel for whatever reason. But our stats on Excel are off the charts. It's tremendous uses of Excel. So I need to study that one a little more to understand, where's their data coming from. I don't think Excel is the right destination for data, but I think it's their ETL tool essentially. So yeah, I don't know. Other questions?
Yeah, let's spend another 5 minutes. Questions? Yes.
Employee Thor Pass.
I just have a quick question, and that is, you brought up politics as
Yeah.
one of the first elements. So for example, upper management, definitely everybody is on board with Power BI. Are there any tips or tricks that you have found in preventing silos and people competing for data, anything from an infrastructure or structure to make everyone work together better?
Yeah, we have some of that. I think that's just human nature. People, scarce resources, people get competitive. But I'd like to, I think that our executives are pretty mature, and we have an operating model where we have a BI steering committee of executives who come together every 6 weeks to talk about BI and to support and nurture the strategy. And they're buddies in that meeting, and then they go back and they compete. But it's, I think some of that competition is healthy. I think where it gets toxic is when there's no communication, there's no partnership of, almost co-opetition. If two groups are both building their own schema independently and they're not communicating, that's pretty unhealthy. But if they're racing to have, the most data-driven culture in their departments, that's healthy. So it's, in terms of politics, I think the executive personalities trickle down. I sat with with our executives early on, and I just remember looking, in the eyes of this one woman, and she just said, "I have no dashboards," and it was like, it was like a challenge, and it was pretty cool. But I think we've been so fortunate to have a lot of support, and I think it's been more a question not of, are we going to give you the support, but what are you going to do with it, and how do we make it the most effective? We've had, I could keep talking about politics, but we have our own fiefdoms, and I think, also if there's dysfunction at the executive level, I think there's opportunity in the middle level to remedy it. So we have a BICC group and like middle managers of BI who come together, and there's still competition between them, but there's also sharing, and I think facilitating them to pull together to think as that one company. It sounds very cliche, but they know they're there because they're working for Columbia. They know they're not there just to be selfish. So I think there's facilitation. There's even workshops and different things that we probably need to do more of as well. Hope that answers your question.
Hey, Chris, does Gert have a dashboard?
Yeah, she does not. No, she doesn't.
I saw his hand up first. We'll take two, three more.
I think because this is recorded, we have to go back and build her one now.
I'm curious about how much of your users have been used to, well, I guess the printable reports now coming through. How many uses do you have of people that really want more of a printable report, and how much of your users are?
Yeah, no, I got you. So your question is printing. Like, what are you doing with printing?
How many of your users are doing analytical things as opposed to a dashboard that once it gets built is solving all the problems?
Yeah. So printing, we have all the stats on that. I can give you a list of who our heaviest printers are. They tend to be executive assistants. I'm not going to name names, but there is an executive whose data warehouse is a stack of printouts, I believe.
That's where paginated report bearer comes in, right?
Yes. And if you have any questions about printing and the psychological damage it does to your team, go talk to Ryan over there. He's doing an excellent job of keeping up with that. And so when you talk about analytical reports, there's lowercase analytical, which is data discovery and descriptive analytics, and then there's capital A analytics with machine learning. I'm assuming you're focused on the first one. Yeah, there's the biggest problem I see with that is I don't think our self-service analysts, despite the fact that we train them, come baked in with IT data management principles. And I see a lot of reports named, sales FY19, sales spring. That's a sign that people are not building models. They're doing one-off things. And that clutter starts to build up. So, there's some of that you just kind of pick them off one by one and explain to them. Even our IT group is not in our core team, but some of our sister teams they have 4 data sets that are refreshing all simultaneously the same data. So it's a challenge, but I don't know if you guys saw the natural language search that they just announced recently at the summit. Check it out. It's a new visual for natural language that I think is going to make that analytic, data discovery for the consumers, the broad audience, a lot more effective.
Awesome.
Didn't answer your question, but we can talk later.
All right. Well, I hate to end this right now, but we're getting a little bit over time. But let's give it up for Chris.